This works. So I kind of want to dive right into what I think is often a frame that gets brought up. I'm good, thanks. Often a frame that gets brought up with respect to AI in the news is, aren't these systems going to take jobs away from journalists? I think we heard plenty of examples today from you all about how that might not be the case. But I wanted to pose it as a question to you all now. Are you hiring or firing? Are jobs going away? Are we creating new jobs?
Why don't we decide to get away from that framing, Nick?
Well, tell us about the jobs that are being created.
And as you were saying earlier, I mean, it's really very much, and you made a very good point, like it's about the intention. I mean, we're looking to make journalists' jobs easier, and instead of having them do essentially stenography work or the clerical work of transcribing a video or that sort of, we want our journalists out interviewing people and thinking and digging through documents and all of that kind of stuff. But to the point, I do think certainly the importance of data literacy. I mean, it's never been more important, and it does create new jobs for data management and things of that nature. But I mean, we absolutely have. It's been about shifting jobs rather than eliminating them.
Yeah, Nick, and I'll once again echo what Lisa is saying. And Bloomberg is hiring. The jobs that people used to do were very repetitive, sending headlines, and now we can have computers do that. So their jobs are evolving and transitioning into new roles that are coming up that are more valuable within the newsroom, as opposed to things that computers can do now.
So let's talk about that transition a little bit. I mean, what kind of skills do journalists need to learn in order to work with these new tools and technologies?
Well, I think for the most part, we've seen a lot of people say, well, you need to code and you need to do a lot of other things. But I think the big thing they need to have an understanding of is just what coding is, what Python is, what data is, how you can use it, how are models created, and what can AI and machine learning do and what can't it do. So that if they can pick up on things where a model can be created, then they can help us with that process as opposed to kind of like, going against it. And if there are things that the machine learning models can't do, then they know that's where they need to put more time and effort into. So I think that the biggest thing is, like I mentioned before, is just educating people on what's out there as far as machine learning and AI goes and just what it can do.
Yeah, I'd just say, and I think going back to the problem, is this going to create or end jobs? And I think one of the things is that if we use this to just kind of reduce the work, that, who knows what the effect will be. But I think AI has an opportunity to kind of help news organizations rebuild moats and sort of rebuild defensible assets for themselves, where if you have a machine that's able to uniquely do earnings calls better and more quickly than anybody else, that's going to be something that's going to make those jobs more secure, because it's going to be harder for other people to take them out. And I think for the skills that really work well for journalists, I think there's a lot of programming jobs, a lot of AI expertise, which is really helpful. But I also think sort of having journalists who are able to sort of think through systematically, hey, I don't want to just tell one story. I want to find a way to tell this category of story again and again in new and exciting ways. And I think that's a really hard skill for people to learn, sort of thinking, I'm not just going to report on this one baseball game. I want to sort of tackle a way to report on every baseball game. And I think that kind of system thinking is a really valuable skill when tackling this stuff.
So what other kinds of work pop up in terms of being able to participate in the development of these systems? I mean, are we talking about entirely new jobs cropping up? Are we talking about pieces of jobs that are evolving? I mean, what do the tasks look like for working with these tools?
I would say it's pieces of jobs. Example always uses that we're dependent on our clients looking at very specific events that occur. So, for example, refinery outages aren't necessarily the coolest thing out there to talk about, but our clients really need to know when one of those occurs. So going to a data scientist or a machine learning expert doesn't necessarily solve that problem because they don't have the expertise around that event. So that's where a lot of this is transitioning, is taking the expertise and knowledge from the newsroom and applying that to models.
Great. I kind of wanted to So Lisa, you were talking about a couple of projects, the one with SAM, which I guess is an external tool that you're evaluating, and then AP Verify, which is an internally developed tool. Can you talk a little bit about the decision to use an external tool versus build an internal tool? And then Ling, also, you're developing internal tools. Maybe you can also speak to this question of internal versus external.
Well, when we decide whether to use internal or external tools, it depends on do we have in-house data? We definitely want to make the best use out of the data we have, and by developing insiding tools, actually we can better understand our needs. When we use external tools, the problem is that we need to communicate with them a lot of times for them to understand our needs. But if we basically for most of the cases we prefer building internal tools because we can go to the newsroom and talk to them and understand what they really need, and they can also come to us when they have any potential use cases. Yeah.
Yeah, so far, and I made reference to this earlier, we've just adopted a strategy that we would prefer to find the expertise outside the newsroom, where we certainly do not have the expertise. And we've just found that working with particularly startups, occasionally universities, we can build or modify tools that work for us, and that's just, we feel like it's been a faster way to test things. And in the case specifically of AP often then invests in those companies. So that's kind of an underpinning of why we do it that way. We actually are an investor in SAM, and our head of strategy sits on their board. But now, of course, we invest in these companies only after we've done a project with them and know that the technology works. But we've found that approach enables us to be more nimble, and we don't have to, because newsrooms ask me all the time, we don't have a big technology budget, we don't have any R&D budget, we don't have a big tools budget, what do we do? And I think, well, we don't either, relatively speaking, and so we have identified this playbook for working with startups to do this.
But we have been seeing a lot of the AI that's coming out in journalism is from bigger organizations. What's the role of smaller newsrooms in this domain? Can they play?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And I think one of the things we've been thinking a lot about, so even now we're 7 total people, 2 developers who we do now have some internal AI expertise, machine learning expertise. So that's a lot better than we were a few years ago. But I think look for sort of your relative strengths, right? I think you cannot compete, if you're a small organization, you can't compete with the Bloombergs, the Washington Post, the APs of the world, and you definitely can't compete with the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. But what you can do is bring a lot of unique value to your community. If you go out and sort of talk to people and say, hey, what are the data challenges you have? Because for the most part, the Facebooks and Googles of the world are not going to your community meetings. They're not talking to your local housing advocates. And so there can be a lot of really rich opportunities to build connections with your community. And I think that's one of the things we've been doing, is going to a lot of community groups, sort of saying, hey, what are some of the challenges you have? What are the questions you have? Show us the processes you look at when you look at housing equity, when you look at other areas. And then there's huge opportunities, even without a lot of technical expertise. Just paying attention and bringing what you have to those communities can build a lot of value and trust.
And I'll just add real quickly, there are smaller newsrooms all over the world who are using these technologies, and even small newsrooms can identify startups at the local university to work with them on developing some of the systems. And one of the things, there is nothing more glamorous right now than metadata and the archive. Now, every newsroom here has an archive, whether it's text, photo, video, whatever it is. Now replace that word archive with the term training data. That is valuable. What you have is valuable, even if you're a small newsroom. And so I think it's not necessarily just about having a big budget for these things. It's about thinking strategically about how, what are the problems you want to solve and how can you do that?
So I think we have some time to open it up to audience questions. Yes.
They are. Almost.
Hi, Julio Sanchez, Prodigioso Volcan, Mexico. This is a question for Ling. You work with ARC Publishing, right, at the Post. These tools that you talked about, like the Modbot, are they included in the ARC Publishing CMS?
Yeah, most of them are in the ARC publishing suite.
Okay, that was basically the question. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Questions?
One here, well, Angela, and then Jay here. Yeah.
One kind of threat to journalism through machine learning and AI is deepfake video, which is using machine learning and AI to like stitch images onto other people's faces in video or put another person's voice into, you know, a video. And I was curious about, is AP Verify meant to be your response? Can you talk a little about what the AP sees as the threat from deepfake and what you're doing about it?
So AP Verify, at least right now, is meant to be a tool to identify accurate video posted on social media related to news events and then, you know, verifying them. Right now, the functionality is not, there's no deep fake detector right now that's built into that. We are concerned, obviously, about the potential of this, are monitoring and in talks with a lot of different companies that are coming up with solutions. We don't think we're there yet. I mean, a true deep fake, common, you know, the common, you know, proliferation of deep fakes is still a ways out there. I mean, as an example, we've been talking with a group of interesting neurologists who have used the study of micro expressions in their treatment of spinal cord injury, patients with spinal cord injuries. And there's been some discussion about using that expertise to develop a tool that can study people's micro expressions to verify. And so, you know, can we get to a point where we've kind of got, you know, trusted face watermarks or, you know, trusted face sort of technologies. So we're talking and exploring all of these things, but not yet now developing a tool to address that.
So one of the threats from machine learning, this is sort of the deep fake issue, is an external threat. But I kind of also wanted to reflect back on sort of the internal threats that might be posed by using machine learning in the newsroom. Ling, you talked a little bit about some of the quality issues that might crop up. Do you want to comment further on that? How does the Post think about maintaining quality when they're using machine learning?
Well, so if we talk about the accuracy of the models, it's not realistic to if we require the model to be 100% accurate. So we need to have another layer of quality control that involving human intervention. So that's why we use the threshold to control Modbot, because we can throw out a model and just say we can use the 0.5 at the cut point. We can achieve over 80% accuracy with that. But what about the other 20%? We can push our commenters away. So that's why we need to be very careful about how we use them. So even if we can, from the technical side, we can improve the model and improve the accuracy to, let's say, 90%, but what about the other 10%? So it's always important to have the quality control and how we use them on a strategical level.
Sounds like there's a whole bunch of interesting editorial questions emerging there about how do we edit machine learning models. But we have a question up here. Okay.
Yeah, this is a question for Clay. Do you watch the Showtime series Billions?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I watch it too, and it's very obvious with that show that Axe Capital, this hedge fund, is very much driven by news, and things pop up in the news, and they are obviously of importance to the traders, and they hop on it, and very often Axe, the main character, has his own sources of news. So my question is, the most exciting thing that I heard about in this presentation was using AI to find things that are happening that could be news. Is it your perception that the very rich companies like hedge funds and investment banks and the other companies that are clients of Bloomberg have themselves their own systems for scanning large amounts of data and finding those weak signals that might tell you that something's happening that's newsworthy. In other words, is the industry already in possession of these tools and journalists have to create their own? Or are they trying to create the same systems that you're trying to create? Like, who's ahead here, the hedge funds or the newsrooms?
Well, you really got me on the spot there. So what I would say is that it's kind of like the issue we all deal with spam. You know, as good as your inbox is, eventually the spam will hop ahead and you'll get a couple of those. And the same thing goes with what you're describing, you know, within journalism and Bloomberg and our clients, you know, they'll jump ahead, we'll jump ahead as far as, you know, who's better at finding these particular events. But a lot of these funds are quant funds, and that's what they do. You know, they create models to detect things that they can trade off of. And that's been going on for a long time. And as more things are becoming machine readable, the more signals and the more opportunity that they have, but also the more opportunity that we have too. So I think that while they are out there trying to do the same things that we are, they're not able to think of everything that we do, and they're not able to have the same sources that journalists do. So I think there is kind of we're both running in the same direction, but we're not necessarily running on the same road. You know, I think that's a good way to kind of look at it. But yes, I mean, that is a great show, and they are definitely using signals to try and pick up things, but it's been going on for a long, long time.
I have a question over here from Elf.
Thank you for a very rich discussion. So I'm going to play the devil's advocate because I do sense a little bit of techno-utopianism here that reminds me of panels at ISOJ around blogging and social media, and I've been just as guilty of that as anybody else. So I want to ask you something. What's your worst dark forest prediction for AI crushing the news?
Whoa. Facebook.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Facebook recommendation algorithm and the way that it tunes into different signals from users and how that algorithm amplifies perhaps some of the worst things about human psychology.
I think the biggest danger is around algorithm-driven distribution, which of course we haven't, you know, talked about here. It's been more about the practical application. But even within that, you know, the slide Rosenthal refused to let me get to was about the risks. I mean, we don't, you know, we're not here, you know, it is about intent. You have very excellent organizations sitting up here who have, I mean, our standards editor was very heavily involved in our projects around AI to ensure that our news values and principles, you know, were being followed along with this. Well, you know, okay, like not every organization is going to have that. But this does raise so many interesting issues. I mean, we just completed, as I said, this test around event detection. And I think, you know, one thing that's really important to talk about is, you know, what happens when journalists start relying too much on tools like this to detect the news. Well, you know, is Twitter, Snap and YouTube really the place where we want to start relying on, you know, detecting the news? And, you know, we need to make sure that we're intentionally still going out and walking the neighborhoods and doing all those things that the human journalists are able to do. And by the way, this is not a new dilemma. I mean, when people ask, why is there so much crime news? Well, it's because it's public record and it's easier to send a journalist to get those police reports than to walk the neighborhood. So these issues aren't new, but the AI technology magnifies it and speeds it up. And so we have to be very conscious, of course, of these ethical questions and really make sure that we are intentionally developing our strategy to reflect that.
Just to, once again, add on to what Lisa said, I think it's a combination of the platforms, the technology, and us. You know, we're moving towards models where people have to pay money to see quality news. And if you look at that, what happens to the minorities and countries that don't have access to that? You know, they have to go to the platforms to get their news for free or to see what their friends are saying about something. And yeah, I think that that's a good way to look at things, is that I think we also have to be able to make quality news that we're producing, you know, available for everyone out there, not just a select few people or parts of the world.
I think we had one other question.
Question where?
A question over here.
Whoa.
Maybe the last question.
Yes.
This question is actually for Clay. I wanted to know about the audio experience that you're providing for your audience and what you think the future of audio and journalism could be for publications like Bloomberg and others.
So so I deal more with the newsroom as far as the product externally with Bloomberg and audio. I think that's a completely different team. I'm happy to speak about that. But internally within the newsroom, you know, right now everyone knows that they record everything that they do, all the interviews, and being able to transcribe those, I think, is a really big benefit now. You know, more people are asking about that, wanting to do it, and it also allows them to include more content in the stories they write, better content. So I think there's definitely a big place for that within every newsroom. The other thing is to, transcribe everything. Once you turn something into text, then you can run that text through a model and you can figure things out a lot better and a lot faster. As far as monetizing voice, I think there's a lot to figure out there. You know, you perform a search on Google, there's advertising. You do a search on Alexa, there's an answer. You don't know where that answer came from half the time, most of the time. I'm not just picking on Alexa and just in general. And you don't know not only where it came from, but there's no monetization around that. You go to get your weather on the Weather Channel, there's advertising there, there's rationale behind why people would do that, and you know exactly where it came from. I asked Siri this morning what the weather was going to be. So I could take one of those cool scooters they have laying literally everywhere around the city here, and it just told me what the weather was. I don't know where it came from, and I think that's one of the big issues that I think all these big major organizations are going to have to tackle is the monetization and the transparency around the answers that they're giving to questions.
All right, thank you very much. This was a great panel.